the Botanical Congress, so there's a political overtone to this get-together. So I think that's why I'm here after listening to all the scientists that you just had. And I think that it's actually an important message, which is, and I've been talking to Mike and some others, some individual companies, individual people in this room in recent times about the need to sort of be, I mean, politically is probably not the right word, but certainly engaged with your regulators, I think is an important thing to do. The notion that a $6 billion industry is going to stay under the radar of regulators doesn't really make a lot of sense. Rather, I think a better practice would be to educate and inform those regulators. So let me start by sort of giving you the overlay 101, which is you have your federal regulators and you have your state regulators. Your federal regulators, obviously in this industry, would be the FDA, the FTC, and the CFPB. Has anyone, show of hands, has anyone heard of the CFPB? Okay, so very, very few of you. They're going to be your biggest problem coming up, so you might want to pay attention to what that is. It's the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. And it was started a few years back. The head of it is a guy named Rich Cordray. He's the director. He was the former Attorney General of Ohio. He was actually my mentee when he was the Attorney General. And they do just what they say, the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. So they are really supposed to be jurisdictionally within the financial industry space, but they branch out. And if you're ever in the position of saying, well, they don't have jurisdiction over us, you're going to lose that battle. So you want to kind of engage with them, and they're going to keep getting bigger and bigger as they figure out what their space in fact is. But for the most part, the FDA and the FTC are traditionally your bigger areas. And then there's the state side, and that is really state AGs, and that's where I come in. Sheldon mentioned that I was the Attorney General of Maryland for the last 8 years. I just finished my term in January, and during that time, I was the president of NAG. The National Association of Attorneys General. People think of it as the National Association of Aspiring Governors, which is another one of the acronyms, which is actually relevant to you because of the Attorney General of New York, which we'll get to. Within the Attorney General world, though, in state regulatory space, if your company is being investigated by a state regulatory authority or a state agency, most likely the regulator, the person that's investigating you, is an assistant attorney general. So they don't necessarily work for that agency, they work for the attorney general, but they're the lawyers for every state agency. That's what AGs are. They're the lawyers for the state. So you're actually in that space as well. Within the attorney general world, there is NAG, which is the 50-state bipartisan organization that doesn't take corporate money and is really, for the most part, is bipartisan. It's gotten a little bit more partisan as AGs go on to become governors and U.S. senators. But for the most part, it's pretty much you're an AG first and you do your politics at home, particularly on issues of states' rights. When the feds try and Bigfoot AGs in the consumer protection space, most obvious, the AGs band together, whether they're far right-wing, far left-wing, or somewhere in the middle, they stick together. Within NAG, there's 4 different regions. There's the East, the South, the Midwest, and the West. The West is called CWAG, which is the Coalition of Western Attorneys General. They do take corporate money, and they have conferences throughout the year. Their big conference every year, unfortunately I had to attend. This year was in Hawaii, which was very nice, actually. But they have a summer conference. And the reason why I bring that up is because they have, for example, the summer conference, they'll have 27, 28, 29 AGs, and 900 people will go to that conference. Well, who are the remaining 800 and some odd folks? Well, they're government relations people for companies. They're lawyers for general counsels for companies. And there are some plaintiffs' firms and class action lawyers that are trying to get the Attorney General's attention to help bring cases. So there's a lot of lobbying going on and access that's going on at these conferences. There's 2 other entities that you should be aware of. Back in 2000, something called RAGA sprouted up, and that's the Republican Attorney Generals Association. And 2 years later, DAGA came into being. That's the Democratic Attorney General Association. And they also have 3 conferences a year and a variety of dinners. And that's where the AGs get together, as well as the government relations people, people like myself, former attorneys general that represent associations or companies, to say, hey, General so-and-so, do you have a few minutes? I'd like to talk to you about all the good work the company that I represent does. Or General so-and-so, I understand that you're looking into this particular industry or this particular company. Love to really tell you what really is going on out there. And those are a couple organizations that do exist. There's a lot of interaction between the federal regulators and the state regulators. In your world, the FDA obviously has a floor, the GMP, the Good Manufacturing Process, which you would think if you're sort of following that and you have certification from USP, NSF, or a recognized organization that includes identity testing, then you're up to snuff, you're in good shape, your problems are solved. Well, the problem from the state regulatory viewpoint is that the federal regulation is a floor, not a ceiling. So they feel that they may want to go beyond that. And the tension within the federal space, if there is one, from a regulator standpoint, is that supplements are exempt from FDA strict approval processes like the prescription drugs, yet they're regulated by the FDA nonetheless. And there's also sort of internal industry tension sometimes between those who are making prescription drugs and those who are in your industry. And the competitors, if you will sometimes bring issues to the attention of regulators that they may not have been aware of, and now all of a sudden it's in their radar screen and they send you a letter or issue a phone call. So most of your problems were in the federal space until earlier this year. You've had state regulatory people looking at the industry, but really sporadically, until earlier this year, where General Schneiderman of New York decided that this was going to be an issue that he was going to take on. And New York is a big state. The last two AGs from New York, Cuomo and Spitzer, became governor. And it would not shock anybody in New York if General Schneiderman were to run for governor someday. I have a very good relationship with him. I have dinner with him all the time. He's a great individual. He's a nice individual. But he sees himself as very much as a consumer advocate, and there is the knight in shining armor to protect consumers against industries that have gone amok. So he went public against a company called GNC. They're a big one. And he issued his letter and his outcry to 4 of the big companies. And many of you in this room will think GNC won that case. I would tell you you're wrong. Because the reason why I would tell you you're wrong is the day that General Schneiderman got up in front of this mic, but actually a bank of them, and said that 80% of the products that are in GNC, in the herbs that are supposed to be in the capsules of GNC products are not in there, but in fact, there are 70% of the products that GNC makes contain unlisted additives, including allergens. That day, he won. It doesn't matter what happened after that. It's like, this U.S. senator that's accused of sleeping with 4-year-old boys, that's on the front page. Turns out he didn't do it. That makes the back page. So the day that he got out there and made that pronouncement, everybody was listening, really hurt. Well, GNC's stock went down 5% that day, but the reputational harm can never really be overcome. So that's why there's a real interest, I would submit, to the industry, to people, to companies within the industry, to make sure you get in front of these cases. Because most cases and most investigations never become public. And they're often kind of handled silently or quietly, and there's a lot of need to make improvement, or it's a joint press conference talking about, hey, we got together, we thought it'd be better if we just did it this way or that way. So clearly, I think everybody in this room, or at least the majority of people in this room, would think that DNA barcoding was not the best test to do on finished products. And the people in this room and companies were then left to the idea of sort of writing letters to the editor and other ways to try and say, hey, but the testing methodology was flawed, because it was, right, as a finished product. But the public The problem is for the public, that word DNA, no one really knew what that was until O.J. Simpson came along, and then the O.J. Simpson trial came along. I was a prosecutor for 22 years. You can't have a shoplifting case now without showing DNA to the jury, right? I mean, that's a little over the top. But the fact of the matter is they understand what DNA is. So when General Schneiderman says that we did the DNA test and this stuff's not in there, they believe it. Because it's dispositive in so many human forensic situations that the authenticity of the final product should have been tested by some of the things you heard of in the last panel, products that contain botanical extracts, microscopy, chromatography, and all those other words that I don't know. I stopped listening, at Hello with the last guys. I didn't understand a word of that. Not a science guy. But the result of the suit really was that GNC admitted no wrongdoing, which, by the way, isn't atypical. That sort of happens. They didn't have to spend a lot of money. They weren't fined. And they agreed to delve deeper into the supply chain when actually DNA barcoding, sort of in a way to save face for the methodology, where DNA barcoding can work, is a little earlier in the process, and now they're going to do that. But there's also the New York AG's office became almost an independent regulatory authority because GNC now has to report back to them every 18 months and so forth with issues that the AG thinks that they should be concerned about. The issues that AGs, I would submit, should be concerned about are identity of the products, the potency of the products, and the purity of the products. And I think that is where we're going to end up going. The other problem I should mention, of course, is once the AG comes out there and makes this announcement, those lawyers I was talking about at the conference that do the class action cases, they all get all worked up and they start bringing class action suits. And whether or not they can show damages or not, they start bringing the suits, and some of them are nuisance suits, but it costs money to make those go away. So that's a case that's sort of an example of where things can go wrong, and from whichever side you might want to look at it, I would submit it wasn't really a good ending for either side, GNC, the industry, or the AG's office. But what's going to happen next? So you're dealing with an industry where there's over 65,000 dietary supplements on the market, consumed by over 150 million people, and it's a $6 billion industry in sales. Plus, the products are sold in stores that people have heard of. And why do I bring that up? Because remember, most of the 50 AGs, 43 are elected by consumers. And who are consumers? Well, they're voters. And so the AGs that are supposed to be defending, consumers against consumer-centric industries that take advantage of those consumers are going to be very vocal about it. And by the way, it's no defense that it's not your product, that it came from the extract or the product came from some third party. You are still going to be on the hook, and even wherever they sold it, if it's Target or a big company, a store that they've heard of, will be on the hook. So just a couple issues, and then I'll take any questions if we still have time. Labeling will always be your biggest problem. What is on the label vis-a-vis what is inside the container and then inside the capsule? Are you putting that rice, onion, pine, peas, wheat, or houseplants are used as filler? Are they inside there? Are you not? And it's a business decision sometimes to choose whether to put that on there or not. I'll tell you where you'll always get in trouble, which is supplements that say that they cure, treat, or prevent a particular disease. That will definitely be a UDAP issue. And if the CFPB gets involved, it'll be UDAP, which is abusive. I personally prosecuted a company, and I found out about it because I thought it sounded incredible. Hand sanitizer. When I was AG, it said that it was, and I'll quote, proven to kill 99.99% of all germs. I just couldn't believe that was true. And it turned out they had actually done no testing, so now they say kills a lot of germs or kills most germs. And that's fine, and people can use it or not. But definitely you want to be concerned with labeling and marketing techniques. There was an April 2nd letter that many of you are probably familiar with. The General Schneiderman put together and got 13 other attorneys general to sign on to. There's 14 AGs on that letter to Congress, trying to sort of create this broad mandate to look into product labeling and marketing as well as quality assurance measures. And I think that you may continue, that sort of the relationship between Congress and the AGs. There's an Attorney General multi-state group. It's a little bit of a loose group. General Jepsen from Connecticut's on there, Zeller from Indiana, and others will continue to look at the industry and cases, and inquiries will probably come out of that. And the last issue I'll discuss is cannabis, which is sort of a growing area that some of you may or may not touch. But there is a committee of AGs. It's not a formal committee. It's the committee of the AGs from the states where this is relevant. For example, General Kaufman from Colorado, General Ferguson from Washington State, General Racine from Washington, D.C., Richards from Alaska, and Rosenblum from Oregon are part of that. They're not an advocacy group, but they do sort of share stories and experiences. Because remember, attorneys general are the chief law enforcement officers of their state, and the whole cannabis issue is coming into their states, and they want to stay abreast of that. So that's something you should be aware of that may kind of seep into your world a little bit more over the years to come. So the last three things I just want to point out are in terms of advice, unsolicited, but that's that whole concept there's no free lunch and you're eating your lunch, would be this. Know your own AG. Wherever your company is, make sure that your company knows your attorney general, just before you're in trouble. Don't have that first meeting after you get a CID or a subpoena or what have you. Make sure they know who you are, what you do, that you're doing good stuff. You're not getting on their radar by doing it. You're reaching out by doing it. Let them know what good citizens you are and all the people that you help. If you do get an inquiry, a letter, a call, take it seriously. Don't ignore it. It'll only get worse. And then the last one is research your complaints. When you get complaints, take them seriously. Look at them, because the people that are complaining to you are also complaining to the Attorney General, and they'll have a pattern. When they see a pattern of complaints, that's one of the ways in which cases get generated. And then the last point I'll make, it'll be completely self-serving, though there are a lot of people like me. When you get in trouble, don't just call your lawyer, the lawyer used for intellectual property and trademark and all that. Call a law firm or a lawyer that deals with AGs, whether they're a former AG or there are law firms that have the sort of an AG practice, because they're the ones that understand the motives, and that they'll know the staff people, and they'll know the AGs and be able to resolve it quicker and the least painfully. So with that, I'll subside and take any questions
Douglas
or thoughts.
Gansler, thank you.
Thank you. Let's see. We got behind already.
We have some time for questions. Anyone have questions here? Okay, we'll come get you.
Howdy, and thank you for coming and talking with us. I'm from Texas, and
the Rangers and the Blue Jays are. I just checked because I bet on it. They're in the 10th inning. Go ahead.
Was that illegal?
I'm in Vegas. I'm allowed to. It's legal.
I was asking, is that a legal bet? Our Attorney General is currently under indictment, so I prefer not to get to know him. Yeah. Mr. Paxton. So
yeah, he is in the one in Pennsylvania as well, one of each party.
Right. With respect to your comments about the optics from the PR point of view and Attorney General Schneiderman's winning that one based on simply the bank of microphones and that issue that, with the GNC, et cetera, despite the fact that the products that were allegedly misbranded, fraudulent, and or potentially posing a public health hazard going on the market that day or the next after they signed the agreement without any kind of changes at all, which basically said they were okay. Aside from that,
they went right back on the shelves.
That's right, which did not get well reported. Aside from that, according to rules of evidence and according to the ethics and propriety of being an attorney general and the leading law enforcement officer of a state, doesn't Schneiderman and or anyone in his position, including yourself previously, have a certain responsibility to ensure that the accuracy and the fundamental fairness of the information upon which they're making public accusations before they do that, and in which case, in this particular case, it's clear that it wasn't done.
Yeah, so it's a great question, and it's why RAGA, when I start talking about RAGA and DAGA, that's the reason why RAGA started, and by the way, I'm a Democrat, I'm a moderate Democrat, but I should put that out there. When I say this, the reason why RAGA started in 2000 was a direct response to what they thought were progressive or overreaching or liberal attorneys general. Interestingly, at the time, it was the New York Attorney General Spitzer, who went out and, in their view, the companies would find out they're in trouble at the press conference. And they had a problem with that, and a lot of people concur in that assessment. My view is, I was a federal prosecutor, I was the DA for 8 years. My view is you need probable cause. You don't need it as a legal matter, but you ought to have it. Probable cause to believe something is going wrong in an industry or a company to issue that kind of a statement. You at least have to have that. And so I think there's no legal requirement or ethical requirement, but there might be a moral thought that would go into it, because the ramifications of doing something of that nature are strong. I mean, you can never, in an industry like this, you can never get that back. People will have read that front page story, not the back story, and they don't really know what DNA barcoding is vis-a-vis the other methodologies that exist out there, or the fact that when it's a finished product, the DNA is contaminated or gone, versus when at the beginning. I mean, no one knows that until you do. You do, but the regular people don't. And so, I always say, but my own view, sort of from a Machiavellian standpoint, when I was AG, was I would call companies in first and try and solve the problem. Because once you've made that first page, you've actually created a problem. So, for example, and I can do a test for you. This is just be fun facts and make you even later, but I'll go ahead and do it. Who here's bought cell phone insurance for themselves or their cars or their kids when you buy a phone? I think about 18, 19, 20% of you have. Okay. So who here's bought cell phone insurance that didn't put their hand up, that thought the deal was when you lose your phone, you're going to pay $6, $7 a month extra, and when you lose your phone, they're going to send you a new one. Okay. Did anyone call then? Who here's actually made that call and found out what really happens? What really happens? And you had a deductible? Yes. All of a sudden, by the way, now all of a sudden there's a $100 deductible that you never heard about, and the phone's new to your daughter, but it's called refurbished. And so I thought that was a problem, because they didn't tell you anything about that. So I brought all 4 companies in. They were making $2.4 billion a year on this cell phone insurance, and we solved it up front. And so I got to talk about how we all work together. We're going to have more transparency. And we changed the system, and without having to do it that way. And it's just, I think, more effective. But a lot of people, like to see themselves on TV on the 5 o'clock news.
Let me ask a follow-up question to Mark's. Do attorneys general ever say, "I'm sorry," or "I was wrong"? And if so, when was the last time that happened?
Well, maybe the indicted ones will, but no, not really. And I think, what the New York Attorney General, not speaking for him, might say is, look, I brought this issue to the fore. These companies, the industry is going to be more careful about what they put on the labels and what's in the product. Didn't cost GNC anything. We didn't fine them. And their process is going to be better because they're going to do barcoding, DNA barcoding earlier in the process. They're going to know about the purity of their own products, and it's really made the world a better place. I mean, I think that's right. So, no. At least I've never heard the "I'm sorry" thing.
Hi, thanks very much for your comments. I have really 2 related questions. The first one is, based on the current scenario, what's been happening with the New York AG, what can the industry do now proactively to try to get ahead of this issue? And as Mark pointed out, the initial investigation was just, and the actions that were taken where companies were forced into settling based on their own economic self-interest, but the science wasn't there to support the action. It was bogus. There was a lot of misinformation. but now we have to deal with that fallout. So the question is, what can industry do? Then the other point that you made was about getting to know your AG. So how does that outreach look?
Which state are you from? Where's your company from?
Well, I'm a lawyer based in Washington, D.C., so I have companies all
Right.
over. But I can see if I said to a client who was doing the right thing, doing business, gee, I think you ought to reach out to your AG and get to know them, they'd probably say, you know what, Holly, I really don't want to do that.
Right. No, no, you're absolutely right, and that's their initial response. If I don't reach out to them, they're not going to know I'm here. And your industry is too big for them to not know you're here. You're here. When you're having $6 billion a year in sales to the people who are voting for them, you're here. And so, it would just be made painfully obvious, I think, through this case. And to your point, bogus testing, this and that and the other. But if you were able to do that up front, so I think, and I've talked to Mike a little bit about this, having somebody in that world, in the AG world, because the AGs are the state people, having somebody in that world and that goes to the conferences. I mean, I had my last meeting literally before I came here an hour ago was with the AG from here, Nevada, with a potential client that I wanted them to meet that has no issues, but just wanted to come in and say, hey, we're going to be in your state. We're coming. This is what we're all about. We're doing good stuff. And at the end of that conversation, he said, how can I help? And so, and it's like everything else, but you would not reach out necessarily. That's why I asked what state. It depends on the state. In New Hampshire, you might call Joe Foster. But if you're in Illinois, you're not going to call Lisa Madigan and say, hey, what are you doing at 2 o'clock? But you'll call the consumer protection people, which are the people that you're most concerned about, and have a meeting with them and say, look, we're here. We got a lot of jobs here. We're doing good work. We provide this service to people, and we just want to know you to know that. So, because no one's going to, as a general rule, they're not going to go after the company. I mean, I read the GNC stuff on my flight out here. I was like, really? How the hell that happened? And my guess is there was not a pre-existing relationship between GNC and the Pennsylvania AG, which, he mentioned Texas. The Pennsylvania AG's also been indicted just to make sure both parties are covered. But I'm sure there wasn't that relationship because you won't go after a company, particularly a big company, without at least going through the AG and trying to solve the problem up front. And that conversation, with the GNC, let's say everything we think is true. They wouldn't have gone down that path had that conversation happened up front. I mean, because frankly, General Schneiderman is very smart. Went to Amherst and did well, went to Harvard Law School. But I can assure you, he didn't know anything about what was going on in that last panel that I heard with all the diagrams. And I picked up a book back there with all kinds of things. That's not their thing, and someone's got to explain that to them.
Okay, one more.
So just to follow up on Holly's question, the first one was, what can we do as an industry? So we know we have some issues we're trying to solve, and one of the trade associations had said the biggest issue we have to solve, the biggest burning platform is the AG situation in the other states. So, it would be great to get your insights on that. And second unrelated question is, do you take supplements, and as a consumer, what do you think of our industry?
Let me answer the first one first. I don't take supplements because I'm afraid of drugs. Like I don't, I have a cut. I play lacrosse still. I'm 52 years old. I'm still running around out there. I had a big gash. Some big, huge, fat old guy. I shot. 28 minutes later, it comes down with a stick and ripped my leg off. And I haven't done anything to it. So of course it's still cut and it's probably infected because I don't do it. So I don't really take anything. If I would, it's not that. I think it's a problem. I think the industry's great. I think it's doing good work and it's helping people. And look, there are bad players in your industry. Don't kid yourself. They're the ones that are going to end up getting the good players in trouble at the end of the day. GNC, one would not think would be one of them. It'd be a smaller fly-by-night, a couple of guys in the garage putting these supplements out in the market. So the self-regulating part of the industry needs to be there, right, to make sure that those guys aren't there. I always tell doctors this all the time. The reason why people beat up on you is because you're terrible at self-regulation. Lawyers are good at it. Doctors are bad at it. So self-regulation from an industry standpoint would be very good. And by the way, that helps with the AGs. we have this self-regulation. We look at, here's what we need to do, here's what companies that need to do. If they're going to join our organization, they have to have X, Y, and Z standards. They have to be at a certain level. I do think that you ought to be engaged in the AG world. I represent, me personally, there's a lot of people like me, so I'm not doing, it's hard to answer that question without doing a little bit of a sales pitch, but I'm not going to do it. But there are former attorneys general in that space that go to these conferences, they monitor the conferences, they see when there's a panel about vitamins, supplements, herb, cannabis, whatever the issue is, and they say, hey, you might want to get somebody from your organization on this panel to present both sides. And if there's a company that's actually being looked at and they are represented by a former AG or someone in that space, they'll typically call that person first, and then they can navigate those cases. So that's another thing. And, look, I think I said a few of the issues, not just knowing your AG, but really take seriously the complaints you get. Because, it's easy, that's just some disgruntled person that had a disease, thought they were going to get better because they took the supplement and didn't. I'm going to ignore that. As opposed to actually address that, because that person's also calling their AG, as are 5 others. And now you just got yourself a phone call or a letter of inquiry or something from the AG. So there's a number of common sense. The one thing I wouldn't do is think that they're going away, because they're not.
How about a nice hand for Doug Gansler?
Thank you. Thanks for having me.